My name is Paul Jansen. I'm the manager of Turner Hopkins Services, which is our specialist immigration division. And I'm a fully licensed immigration advisor, and I also represent the LIAA, which is an industry association, and I've been in the industry for almost 20 years. Migrating to another country is enormous, and being a part of that, being able to see people through that process, for me, gets me out of bed every day and just, I guess, is my passion. The advice I give to clients, which is kind of a 4-step process, and I've followed it through almost 20 years of doing this, and it seems to work really well. Number 1, plan and prepare. Never underestimate the amount of planning you can do. But number 2 is kind of be flexible in that as well. So you can't plan for absolutely everything. Number 3 is to follow your guide. If you employ someone to do this, to assist you through the process, to follow that. And number 4 is to just trust your gut. To do this, if you're going to do this, to commit to it 100% and believe you're doing it for the right reason. Coming to a law firm for me was a little bit, I guess, nerve-wracking. People have a perception of what a law firm is like. So as an outsider coming into that, it was really interesting to actually realize that it's not that way. Turner Hopkins is a very family-focused business, very social, very engaged with their staff, and it's just a really enjoyable experience. Very progressive, and really enjoy just getting things done and trying new things. Good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Paul Jansen, and I will be presenting to you for the next 60 minutes or so. Might be a little bit quicker than that, depending on how quickly we get through it all. We will have a short session at the end for questions, and if you have any questions, pop them in the chat window, and I'll answer them at the end. If you have any questions, make sure they are fairly general. It's very difficult for me to answer specific questions in relation to whether or not you might qualify in a seminar format like this. We do have options for assessments, which I'll talk through at the end as well, where we can go over your details more specifically. But in this format, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat panel and I'll come to them near the end. We've got a lot to cover. And really today's sort of event is all about giving you a broad overview as to how the process works, what's involved, and a little bit of an introduction to New Zealand as well. So we're going to talk through some of the basics you need to know about New Zealand. A lot of you will do your own research, and I think that's really important that you do that research. I have some advice on how to do that research as well. Just make sure that the sources you use are the right sources. There's an awful lot of information out there, and a lot of it is just simply inaccurate. So make sure that when you are doing your research on making the move, that you look up the things that are relevant to you, and you use sources that will give you the most up-to-date and the most realistic advice as well. We're going to go through the visa system, just an overview as to how it works, the key streams or pathways that are available to people. This isn't designed to be a how-to guide as to making the move. It is really more of a broad outline of what's involved. And the idea being that from here, you should be able to identify whether one of these pathways is available to you and how that might work. We'll talk through those pathways in a little bit of detail. So we'll touch on family and business visas. I don't tend to spend a lot of time on those in this session. Primarily because the majority of the people I talk to or I consult with are really looking at coming through under the skilled migrant pathway. So we'll break that skilled migrant pathway down into much more detail so you can see how that works or how those two pathways work. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with what a successful migration might mean. So what does that look like? What's involved? And really, it isn't all about the visa. There are so many other things you need to think about. And then finally, when we've finished the formalities, I guess, we'll talk about what you do next. So if you are interested in making this move, if this is something you want to do and you're keen to start the process, where do you go from here? In terms of a sort of brief overview on New Zealand, I could do an entire seminar event on these things alone. But I guess probably the 4 things that are really relevant to people who are considering the move are employment, education and healthcare, property, and the cost of living. So we talk about employment first, because for most of you, securing a job offer is going to be a really important, if not the most important part of the visa process. And as you'll see when we get to those visa categories, having a job offer is a really key step. And fortunately for you, unemployment remains very low at currently 3.9%. It has moved up slightly since last year when it was sort of down near 3%. So we have seen it shift, and we are seeing it shift this year, which we will continue to see as the country tackles inflation. Unemployment will gradually creep up. The prediction is anywhere from sort of 5 to 6% over the next 12 to 24 months. But even then, with those numbers, that's still fairly low in a global context, which means that there are jobs available. We are still seeing a good number of jobs available for people to apply for, and there is still a relative demand from employers to recruit people, and that inevitably means if they cannot find them locally, they're looking offshore. So that's good news for you. One of the pieces of advice I give my clients as we step through this process is to keep a close eye on the labour market as they plan their move, because ultimately you want to be striking while that iron is hot. And the more jobs that are available and the fewer people there are to do those jobs here, the greater the demand for or from employers to recruit migrant labour. So really keeping an eye on what the opportunities are for you with your particular skill set is a really important part of your planning process. In terms of education and healthcare, these are taxpayer funded. So for some of you, that might be a bit of a strange concept. You're used to paying for education and healthcare privately. Over here, they are funded out of taxpayer dollars. So as you pay your taxes, you also have access to both of these things. Many people still opt for private healthcare insurance, but it's a relatively low cost because the public system works reasonably well. And these two things are available to you not only as a resident, but also, and this is really important to know, on a work visa, which is probably one of the steps you will have to take. Many people have to move through the visa process, starting with a work visa and then moving on to residence at some point in the future. And so being able to access good education for your children, which is free, and good healthcare for your family, which is free, is something you can do while you're on those temporary visas. Property, and some of you may have been looking at the cost of property in New Zealand. It is expensive relative to incomes. And certainly if you were comparing it to somewhere like South Africa, for example, property is a costly exercise here, but you're not going to be buying a house the minute you get off the plane. So realistically, the best way to look at property prices is not from the view of what it costs and what you're earning now, but potentially from what you're earning when you're in New Zealand. So what is your salary likely to be? And then how would that translate into paying a mortgage or a bond? And that really feeds into cost of living as well. New Zealand is struggling with increasing cost of living, like many countries around the world in a sort of post-pandemic environment. But to establish what your cost of living might look like, the best way to do that is, again, to start first by establishing what you might earn. And there's a multitude of ways you can find out what your earning potential will be. And once you've established that, you can work backwards a little bit to establish what your costs will be as well. And that will give you a much clearer picture as to what you can afford. What I would add to that is that for the clients that I tend to work with who have, at least one or more commonly both partners are skilled, they bring something to the equation, they're employable, and they'll be earning a sufficient income to cover their costs and live a relatively comfortable lifestyle. That might not be a Maserati in the driveway, but maybe a Mazda. It'll be saving for your retirement, covering all your bills, and putting a little bit of money aside for entertainment and sort of, I guess, fun. So it's doable, it's achievable, but the best way to establish these costs and to look at what they might be is to start with what your earning potential will be. And as part of our consultation process with people who decide to kind of take that next step and find out what they can achieve and what they're eligible for, we do go through a bit of a cost of living exercise. So we establish what your earnings might look like, and then we work towards what your budget will be when you're here. I guess, that was a brief introduction. And again, you'll do a lot of research of your own, which is great. Just make sure that that research focuses in on the right things. What I often find, particularly on social media, is that people who have come here and perhaps failed in the process, largely because they haven't really prepared well, very quick to critique it and to point out the not so good things. But the reality of moving to any country is that there are good and there are bad things to deal with. And so realistically, you just have to be prepared for those. In my experience over 20 years of doing this, people who are prepared and who understand what's involved and who are realistic are much more likely to settle and will settle, very well. Because they understand that it isn't perfect and there are things they need to adjust to and acclimatize to. So we could have spent a whole hour on that, but I want to dive into now the visa stuff and the visa process, really the nuts and bolts of it. And I guess that begins with a bit of an overview as to how our visa process works. And it is very complicated in one sense if you are trying to tackle this process on your own and trying to identify which visa might apply to you and how you apply for them and what documents are required and so forth. So it can be really complicated from that perspective. But also, having done this for so long, you can boil it down and it becomes quite straightforward. We can split our visa process really into two parts. One is temporary visas and the other is residence. And obviously a temporary visa is for a fixed period of time. So it allows you to be in New Zealand, usually for a specific purpose or activity, and it is for a fixed nature. So for example, a work visa, currently most work visas or the most common work visas that we apply for are accredited employer work visas, and they're valid for 5 years. You have student visas typically issued for the length of the course or up to a year at a time. We have visitor visas that will allow you to enter the country and undertake a whole range of tourist activities, and they're normally valid for 6 months, depending on where you're coming from. If you're visa free, so if you hold a certain passport, you may not need to actually apply for it up front, and they can be valid for 3 months or 6 months as well. It's a really important point to understand, though, and it's something that gets talked a lot about on social media chatter, is as part of this process for many people, finding a job is really important. And we'll talk more about that as part of the skilled migrant process. But inevitably, to find that job, part of it requires you to be in New Zealand. And that's pretty logical. If you're trying to find work in any country, being in the country is a big advantage. It demonstrates that you are committed to the job search process, that you are ready to move, that you're capable of starting the work fairly soon. So there's a whole range of reasons why being here is really useful. And obviously, to be here, you're not going to be able to secure a work visa in advance of having the job. It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. You need to have the job to get that visa. So inevitably, coming over here to look for work entails a visitor visa and traveling here as a tourist, essentially, to find work. And now it's not unlawful or illegal to do that. And there is a lot of discussion online about you cannot enter the country as a visitor to look for work. That's nonsense. You can, but you do have to be a little bit clever and a bit careful as to how you do that. And if you apply for a visitor visa, telling immigration you're going to be going up the Sky Tower and sitting on the beach, but really you're coming here and you arrive with your CV and your work references and your police clearances, it's probably not going to go down too well. So the simple fact is there's no harm in saying you want to come on a holiday, and you also have it as a secondary part of your trip. You're going to have a look around and check out the labour market and maybe investigate some job opportunities. Immigration is okay with that as long as we can demonstrate very clearly you have an incentive to leave New Zealand. If it doesn't work out, you're skilled, so there's a good chance you'll get a work visa and be able to stay. There's a few tricks to being able to do that particular kind of application carefully and in the right way. And ultimately, it's about telling the truth and telling immigration why you're coming and what you're coming to do. A lot of people also secure interviews before they arrive, and they may arrive here as a visitor to undertake that interview. Again, completely lawful. The thing you can't do on a visitor visa is work. So you can't start a job until you have secured the appropriate work visa, of course. So that's the temporary visa side of things. There's lots of different variations of visas within those three things. So we have different types of work visa, different types of student visa, and then also different types of visitor visa. But inevitably, most people will need one of those visas in order to then get to residence. And residence really is what we say it is. It is the ability to live here, to work, to study, to reside in New Zealand on an indefinite basis. There are a couple of little tricks to that. So most people secure residence, which comes with some conditions for the first couple of years, and then it becomes permanent residence. And you'll often read about this as well, the difference between residence and permanent residence. The reality is that they're both the same visa. They both allow you to do the same thing. It's just one of them allows you to travel in and out of the country forever. The first one, or the other one, is the visa you get at the start, where you just need to demonstrate some commitment in the first couple of years. Very easy to do. There are 5 different ways you can do that. But with residence, we have, again, also different categories of visa, different pathways that people can secure this residence process. And they include being an investor or running a business. They include being a skilled migrant or having family in the country. And within those 3, there are also different variations of those as well. So a lot of the confusion comes from trying to work out which of these different visas in each of these different pathways or streams you need to apply for, and often how they all fit together. And that's what we are particularly good at, is mapping out a strategy that involves 1, 2, maybe 3 of these visas. As a almost typical scenario, a lot of the clients I work with will arrive on a visitor visa that we've applied for, and we've explained to immigration the purpose of that trip, so why they're coming. They'll then be here and secure a job offer, which will allow us to move onto a work visa, and then they'll transition to residence at some point, depending on when they qualify. So having a really clear plan as to which visas you need, how they fit together, the documents required for each, and it is quite different, allows you to move through those visa processes relatively seamlessly, with the end goal being to secure residence. And look, ultimately, that's what it's all about. It's all about getting you to the point where you can live in New Zealand permanently, where we're able to say, that's it, you can leave the visa process behind, and you now have the right to live here, work here, study here, and do whatever you like. And unfortunately, what I tend to see a lot of, particularly on the social media pages, is people who have gotten very excited about moving to New Zealand and have seen there are good jobs available. They've jumped on a plane, they've come over here, they've found a job, they've secured a work visa, fantastic, but they have no clear pathway to residence. Excuse me. And that's a real issue, because if you're here on a temporary visa with no pathway to residence, you will at some point have to leave New Zealand. And we don't want that to happen. So our goal when we assess anyone and when we're talking to anyone is to try and work out how we get you from where you are to being able to live here permanently. So if we then have a quick look at the family and business visa categories, I'm not going to go into great detail because I want to spend a bit more time on the skilled migrant process. That's really the core set of visas for us, and where we get the most of our applicants coming through. But we do have family and business visas, and the key ones are on screen. So we have a parent category, and that's important for many of my clients because they make the move. And obviously they then think about, well, I want to bring mum or mum and dad, or just dad, or mum and mum, or dad and dad, whatever the case may be. And there are ways to do that. There are in fact 2 ways. We have a ballot-driven parent category, which is essentially a lottery. You as the supporting child, the adult child in New Zealand, must have lived here for 3 years. You currently must be earning a certain income, and you then need to be able to sponsor your parent or parents into the country. But they go into a ballot. And so the difficulty with that one, the tricky part, is that the timing of it is really hard to work out because the ballot is random selection. So you may go into the ballot now, but not be selected for up to 2 years' time. And then you also have to apply. This is a capped category, so we actually have caps on the number of parents who can apply under that category and be approved. So there's only a certain number that can be approved every year. So that also influences how long it might take. My advice on that parent category, though, is if you have parents who do qualify, if you're in New Zealand, or if you're heading this way and thinking about it, is to get the parent EOI, the first stage of the parent category, which is essentially your ticket in the draw. Get it in as fast as possible, because the sooner it is, the sooner you'll be, or you have a potential to be selected. We then have another parent category, which is available if the parents have some money to invest, and that's $1 million to invest and $500,000 to keep them afloat, as well as an annual income equivalent to 60,000 New Zealand dollars. In that case, there is no ballot system. You apply directly, you lodge an application, and it's processed over what is currently about 20 months, so just short of 2 years. And that leads to residents with conditions. The conditions are that the parents must keep the money invested for 4 years, and once they've done that, they can then secure permanent residence. Parent retirement is reasonably popular depending on the country you're coming from and the exchange rate. That's also a big influence, because obviously being able to invest that kind of money is not a small thing. We then have partnership category, which is for people who are in a relationship to a New Zealand citizen or resident and wish to move here to be with them. We handle a lot of those applications, and they come in all shapes, sizes, and varieties. And they are simple in terms of the criteria. You don't have to be married. You simply have to live with your partner for a period of time, 12 months, and you have to be able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. The proving it beyond a reasonable doubt is the tricky part. It's not always easy to be able to demonstrate to Immigration New Zealand your relationship and how it started and how it ended up. But it absolutely is a process you can go through. And there are also temporary visas that are available to partners as a first step as well. We then have the investor category, which requires a minimum investment of $5 million if you invest into direct investments. It's actually a pretty confusing process. It's a $15 million investment, but you get a weighting for different investment types. So if you invest in direct investments, so that's into businesses, startup businesses, for example, that means every dollar you invest is worth 3 to immigration. So 5 million invested directly would actually be equivalent to 15 million for the visa pathway. If you invest in something like managed funds or other more passive types of investments, then those weightings are lower. So you might have to bring more money in. Again, it's very much dependent on where you're coming from, the exchange rate, and your ability to bring that money into the country. But it does offer an investment pathway into New Zealand. And then finally, we have the entrepreneur category. That's for those looking to establish or to buy a business in New Zealand. If you're looking to do that, there is a pathway available there. It's a reasonably complex and somewhat difficult category to apply under. It has a very high decline rate. Your business that you wish to establish or buy has to be either innovative, high growth, unique, has to be reasonably special, and you have to have the experience and the capital to do it. It's a 2-stage process, which means essentially your first visa is a work visa, allowing you to set up that business or to purchase and get it going. And once you've done that for a period of time, normally 2 years, then you're able to pursue residence based on that. So it's a challenging one, and often I will recommend other pathways if I can. And once you're here as a resident, you can obviously go and set up a business without it being a part of your visa requirement. So setting up a new business is hard, running a business is hard no matter where you are. Doing that in a new country is even harder. But if you do have a really good idea and you are really keen on bringing that idea into New Zealand, it is a pathway you can consider. So those are family and business visa pathways. Primarily, there are others. So there are other categories within all of that we can look at, but those are the core ones that we tend to deal with. So now I really want to talk about the skilled migrant category, which is ultimately where we get the bulk of our applicants from. And about 60 or 70% of our migrants come through this. And there are really two pathways within this. We have a point system and a non-point system. And that's going to get a little bit confusing, so bear with me. We're going to talk about the non-points or no-point systems first, and then we're going to move on to the points-based system. The key thing to remember with both of these pathways is that both of them, rely on having skilled employment in New Zealand or some form of employment that immigration considers to be skilled. You also must be under 56 years of age when you apply for residence, not necessarily for the work visa that you apply for as the first stage in some of these visa pathways, but when you apply for residence. And that means you can lodge your application all the way up until your 55th year, 11th month, 3rd week, and 6th day. As long as it's lodged before the day you turn 56, you're safe. And there's a lot of confusion about that online as well. And that's partly because of the way the rules are written. The rules say you must be 55 and under, which means until you turn 56, you still qualify. You must meet a standard of English, which is normally done through a test for most applicants. And you must meet health and character requirements as well. And the same applies to the partner that you might be including and your dependent children. And just on that point, for all residence applications, you can generally include a partner. That doesn't mean you have to be married. It just means you've been living together for a period of at least 12 months. And you can include dependent children up to the age of 25. They must, however, be dependent on you, which means they cannot be in a relationship of their own or earning their own income. And generally, they must live with you, and you must be responsible for their financial well-being. So when we do an assessment, we tend to look at the whole family. We wrap it all up and try and package it up. But we are also looking at which person within the family brings the right skills that will match up with one of these visa options. So the no points skilled migrant residence system has within it multiple pathways as well, but it's primarily driven on two things. One, a green list. So we have a list of occupations that are in demand, and in demand to different degrees. So there are some that are really in demand, some that are kind of in demand. And we also have other things called sector pathways, which are for very specific occupations. The care workforce, the transport sector, where having a job offer in one of those specific occupations with requirements will also lead you to residence as well. The green list is that list of occupations and is split in two. So we have two tiers. There's a tier 1 and then there is a tier 2 of that green list. Tier 1 occupations are those that are considered to be in really high demand, and that might be healthcare professionals, so nurses, doctors, IT professionals, engineers. There's a range of occupations in there. And then tier 2 has other occupations. They tend to be more focused on trades, as an example. And the difference between the two is how quickly they allow you to go for residence. So if you're a tier 1 occupation, if you have one occupation in that first tier, you have the potential to apply directly for residence, or what we call straight to residence, which is processed reasonably quickly. In fact, depending on where you're coming from and the checks required for your application can be done in as little as 5 to 6 weeks. Tier 2 occupations, those applicants have a pathway to residence, but it relies on working here for 2 years first. So it's kind of a work to residence option. You would secure a work visa, come into New Zealand, and then ultimately after 2 years of working in that job, you would then apply for residence. But the really important thing with these two pathways is that they specify within the green list the requirements for that occupation. So for example, if you're an engineer, you must have a specific degree, and there are different options for how that degree is recognized, but you must meet specific requirements as well as having the job offer. If you're a nurse, you must be registered. If you're an IT professional, you must earn a certain salary. So the really key part of this is that the green list has very specific conditions for each occupation, but it is not a points test. So if you're 30 years of age, 45 years of age, 55 years of age, doesn't really matter. If you have 5 years of work experience or 10 years of work experience, doesn't really matter unless that work experience is required for your occupation. But it isn't points-based. So you simply have to secure the job, meet the requirements of the list, and then you either can apply directly for residence or you can apply after a 2-year period. Now that green list will change over time. It's adjusted. It hasn't really been adjusted that much since it was rolled out. We've had some occupations added to it, none taken away so far that I can think of at the top of my head. We've had some minor adjustments to the criteria, but it is a very open and relatively quick pathway to residence for a good number of people. The only challenge there is that the number of jobs on that list is not expansive. It's reasonably large, but it's not huge. So you have to be in the right occupation, tick the right boxes, and be able to secure that job as well. So that's the no point system. There are other parts of that for the care workforce and transport sector, which I won't go into significant detail here, but they work on a 2-year work to residence basis as well. Then we have the other category, which is our points-based system. Now, this has relatively recently undergone a pretty big change. So in October of 2023, we rolled out this new system. We've almost always had a points-based process, and it's gone through a number of changes over the years. Those changes have included sort of how the points have been calculated, the number of points required, the need for a job. It's been a lot of different changes to how the points-based system has been sort of worked out. But what we have at the moment is the current system, which relies on an applicant being able to secure 6 points. And again, you must have a job offer, so that is a crucial part. All applicants must have a job under this category. We no longer have a pathway to residence without a job. That sort of ended in about 2017. So from that point on, we've moved to immigration really being about proving your employability. And that in many ways makes a lot of sense, because having a job here is important not just for the visa, but also because you need the income and it will help you to settle into the country. So making the job a requirement of the visa, there's a lot of logic to that. So in terms of how this point system works, you need 6 points to qualify, and it actually, again, on first view is quite confusing, but once you start to read through it and kind of get your head around it, it becomes reasonably simple. So you can get those points from one of 2 different options. So on the slide that's there, you've got the box on the left, the big box, which has 3 columns. You get points from there. You can only choose an option within one of those columns. You can't add the registration, the qualifications, and the income together. And then you get the balance of points, if you need them, from the small box on the right, which is the New Zealand work experience box. So if we run through in a couple of examples, if you were a registered doctor, that is likely to have taken you 6 years of training. So if you have a job offer in New Zealand, and if you look at that left-hand column there, the first column, 6 years of training is worth 6 points. Basically, you've already got your 6 points just by being registered. You have the job offer, you speak English, you're healthy, no convictions, or at least you can pass the character test. Then that will qualify you to apply straight away for residence. You can apply as soon as you have the job offer. Now, you might need a work visa as part of that, because the residence process could take several months. And so you may be here working in that job already and then going for residence once you're on the work visa. However, let's say you're not registered, but you might have a bachelor degree. So if you have a bachelor's degree and maybe you've got a bachelor degree in accounting and you come to New Zealand and get a job as an accountant, then that bachelor's degree, if you look at the middle column down the bottom, will be worth 3 points. So you need to make up the other 3 points by working in New Zealand for a period of 3 years. And that will then give you your 6-point total. And so in between those who have other levels, so a master's will give you 5 points. So you would have to work here in that job that you secure for 1 year. You might be an electrician and secure 3 years of training for registration. So you have to work for 3 years and so on. So basically the key comes down to what skills you bring, whether it be in a registered profession, whether it be in a qualification, or whether it be in the income you might earn in New Zealand. And then you work out the points that will give you, and you look at whether or not you need to top up with New Zealand experience. Now, the income in New Zealand, that third column, is a really interesting one. So this is broken down into 3. We have a median wage requirement in New Zealand. Currently, as of today, the median wage is $29.66 per hour. Immigration New Zealand bases everything it does on an hourly rate, not an annual salary. So if you're on an annual salary in New Zealand, you need to first work out what your hourly rate is by dividing your annual by the number of weeks in the year and then by the hours you work, and that will give you your hourly rate. Then you can look at whether or not that gives you a pathway to residence. So someone earning 3 times the median income, about $185,000 a year, would get 6 points and be able to apply straight away. High income, high salary generally indicates good level of skill, and so those people are rewarded with a quick pathway to residence. If you're earning 2 times the median income, then you have 4 points, so that's 2 years to residence. And if you're earning 1.5 times the median incomes, about $93,000, then you need 3 years of that work in New Zealand. Now, really important thing, and this gets a little bit confusing, but the median income changes over time. And so you need to be earning the median on the first day of that 3 years of work, or the last day. So if it changes within that 3 years, your salary must go up at the end of that process to match. I guess the important thing there is that what you might notice from the table is that if you had a diploma, for example, that's not going to meet that qualification requirement because the bottom line for qualifications is a bachelor degree. So a diploma, good skilled person with a diploma will not qualify based on the diploma, but may still qualify based on what they can earn in New Zealand. So they get a job earning 1.5 times the median or 2 times the median, that will give them a pathway to residence. Tricky part here is in mapping this all out, and if you do have to work in New Zealand for a period of time, you need to think about your age in that equation. If you're 55 and you need to work for 2 years, by the time you've done the 2 years, you'll have gone over the age barrier for residence. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into making sure you might be able to tick boxes on paper in terms of the points you can secure, but you have to think about how that's going to work in practice. Some people will have a straight to residence direct pathway based on 6 points. Others will have to work here for a period of time. So really important that when you initially start the process, you get a good, thorough assessment of what the options are, but what the strategy is that you need to undertake to tick the boxes and to make this work. I would add to this, however, that this was introduced by the former government. We had an election last year in October. We've changed that government. And so the new government, made up of a coalition of 3 different parties, has indicated in various ways, shapes and forms that there may be a review of this particular pathway because it doesn't recognize a few things and it does create a bit of a different pathway than compared to other countries that we compete with for good talent. So there could be changes to this. My advice on what those changes might look like is very difficult to speculate because there's nothing concrete out there. But I certainly suspect that anything that is introduced would be potentially slightly more favourable than this, and certainly wouldn't make it any more difficult. Not that this is necessarily difficult, it just involves working here for a period of time, and I suspect we might see that disappear over time, or we might see more of a recognition for the fact that often when one person comes, they bring a skilled partner with them. So maybe they introduce points for a partner who also has a job. So The bottom line is immigration rules do change. They change based on the politics of the day, the needs of the country, and so forth. And so it's also important, if you're starting this process, to be kept abreast or up to date with those changes as you're working your way through it. So that gives you a sort of basic outline of the main categories that we operate here. And again, it's not designed to be a how-to guide to migrate, but it really is just a bit of background as to what the visas look like. And that, I guess, is designed to help you figure out where you might fit in all of that. Before we talk about the next step and how you really pin that down and what that strategy will look like, I just wanted to touch on what a successful migration is. Because I often hear, a lot of talk about it's all about the visa and I've got to get the visa and so on and so forth. And yes, the visa is absolutely important. It's a crucial part of the process, but it isn't the only part of the process. And so my advice to a lot of clients as they're starting out is to think, yes, about the visa. We can map that out. We can come up with a plan, and a very realistic plan. But you also need to think about all the other things that go into that. How are you going to settle? If you have children you're bringing with you, how will they settle? What do they think of the move? It's a big deal to give up what you know, to move to another country, to leave behind friends and family. Not as hard as it used to be because the internet gives us so much more access, but you are still moving to a new place, having to find your feet again and having to resettle. So the biggest piece of advice I can give is to be prepared for that, to be realistic about that, to appreciate that this process will be uncomfortable at certain times. There will be things that you don't like about it. There'll be things that you struggle with. It will take time to adjust. Usually it's sort of an upside down bell curve. You start off, it's all new. It's a bit of a honeymoon phase. It's fantastic. It's exciting and that's great. And then you go through a bit of a low period where you miss home, and that's normal. You miss your routines, you miss what you were familiar with. And then slowly over time, you come back out the other side because you settle here and you realize what you've gained by moving. I mean, for most people, particularly if you're coming from countries like South Africa, it's safety, it's security, it's certainty, it's good education for your children, it's their futures. It's a lot of things you need to or a lot of benefits you can get. But I also advise people to, along the way, because it can be very complicated and logistically challenging, is to remember why you're making this move. Write it down, put it on a piece of paper, keep it somewhere, because coming back to that reason will often be a useful way of keeping you motivated. Also, so be prepared, enjoy the adventure. It is a bit of an adventure. This is an exciting thing you're planning on doing. And so, enjoy that. Take the good with the bad and kind of just, I guess, roll with the punches a little bit. Have a good plan, be prepared, but also be prepared to change the plan if you need to. Third thing, take the advice. If you enlist someone like myself to help you through this, to hold your hand along the way, use that advice. It's very, very easy to be swayed by social media and comments flying around. But realistically, it's you making the move, no one else. And so the plan that we come up with for you is your plan. And we've developed that plan based on your circumstances, your situation, what you bring to the table. There'll be a lot of talk online about how to do this or do that, but that applies to those people. So migrating is a very, very unique process and everyone will go through it differently. So take that advice and use it the best you can. But make sure you find the right person to give you that advice. You've got to be comfortable with them. You've got to trust them, and you've got to be comfortable that they understand your situation specifically. And again, be prepared for change. So be a bit flexible on how this works. I have a lot of people who say they want to move in this particular date because that's when schools start and so on and so forth, or they want to move to this location because that's where their brother is or their sister or their auntie. All very relevant, and these are common things for people to bring to the table. But often migration will dictate, the process will dictate when it happens and where you end up. For example, you might decide you really want to live in Wellington, but there's a great job offer in Hamilton. So ultimately, you might end up moving to Hamilton. And that's because getting that job will be the visa the pathway to the visa, And then later on, once you've secured residence, you can move or relocate. A really good story, quick story. I had a great couple from South Africa who moved. They ended up in a very small part of the west coast of the South Island. And when they arrived there, the first words to me were, "We're here for the job, but we're not going to be staying here. We're definitely going to move somewhere else." It took about 9 months to secure their residence. And when that was approved, I said to them, "So you'll be moving fairly soon?" And they said, "No, absolutely not. We love it here." And they've kind of just become used to the environment. They met some friends, they developed a bit of a network of people. The job panned out really well, and so they stayed. So life in this process will change. So you need to adjust and sort of be prepared for what those changes might bring. And last piece of advice, nobody can convince you to make the move. That's not my job. My job is not to sway people to move to New Zealand. My job is to help those people who've decided it's right for them. And ultimately, some people decide it isn't right for them, and that's fine. That's okay. You don't have to move. But if you do decide to do it, a little bit of thinking more about what the relocation involves and not just about the visa will help to prepare you much better. That sort of brings me to the end of the session. We've moved through it a little bit quicker today. Your next move from here, if you were interested in doing this and taking this big step, is to undertake a consultation with one of the team here. And that really involves talking one-to-one about your situation, what you need to do, how it will work for you, your eligibility, and so forth. And we do that by way of a completed online questionnaire. We gather all the information we need from you, and then we spend a good 60 to 90 minutes discussing it with you. If you're interested in that, we will be emailing you, or you can email us via the website or to reply on the registration form we sent you, and then we can book you in for a one-to-one session. Stay tuned for the questions and answers, which we'll do shortly. And I hope you've enjoyed that rather brief overview as to what this process involves, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought, and I guess a starting point for mapping out a potential move. And if you do decide to join us here in New Zealand, we'd love to be able to help you make that happen. All the very best.